There's a good roll-up here this morning, and I really appreciate you coming along. It shows there's a genuine interest in the future of Coffs Harbour, and I think that's a valuable thing, that we have a community that's willing to drive us forward where we want to go. What I want to do this morning very briefly is to initially sort of define the economic strategy, what it all means, talk about partnerships, industry networks, reference group, and touch on the process and timeframes, and a little bit on where to from here. Defining the strategy, first of all, we want to make sure that it's visionary and aspirational. I sort of describe it as what do we want to be when we grow up? And it's not like we're a baby, but there's growth to occur, and I think every community has that. So we need to visualise where we want to be. The danger with this is often that the devil is always in the detail, and I guess at this particular moment we don't want to drill down to the detail. We want to keep it at fairly high level. But it's about thinking about where we want to be. And what we've talked to Grant about is the aspect of linking it to Coffs Harbour 2030, so keeping it aligned to our community strategic plan. Where do we want to go, and thinking about those sort of timeframes, and thinking about bite-sized chunks. How can we deliver on the longer-term goal? It needs to be a collaborative effort. We want to make sure that we have that buy-in, which I've already alluded to. We want to make sure that the various industry sectors are strongly represented and have an opportunity to participate. The broader community, obviously, and we need to link to other levels of government, because often they play a role in delivering on our economic future as well. It needs to be a live document. Any of these community strategic plans need to be a living process where we constantly double check, are we on path? Do we need to adjust? Do we need to respond to some changing conditions that are out there? One of the highlights I think that came from Bernard's presentation this morning, and it's often the case, I guess, when you get the opportunity to network with colleagues who are involved in working with communities, creating place, developing economic strategies on a daily or a weekly or a monthly basis, you tend to understand that others out there might be doing a little tougher than you or doing a little better than you. So I think having someone like Bernard come here this morning, and one of the key messages was, when you compare to other cities, our size, bigger and smaller, that are out there in Australia, we're not doing too bad. I guess we can tend to be somewhat insulated because we're constantly working internally in Coffs and maybe not networking as much externally, but the message was there that we're not doing too bad. But it's about taking us to the next step. How are we going to make sure that we maintain a sustainable economy into the future? I mentioned it needs to be responsive to opportunity. One of the things I met with the proposed author of the strategy, who I'll introduce in a little while, and one of the things I said to him, and he sort of smiled at me, was it needs to be practical and implementable. At the end of the day, we want to make sure that the strategy that we have ready to respond is there and it's achievable. That's really critical. You're not going to be able to see all of this, but very briefly at the top we have Coffs Harbour 2030 as the community strategic plan that drives everything that we do in many ways. In the middle there we have the economic strategy, and in the bottom darker section with those lighter rectangular shapes, they're the industry sector snapshots, or meant to be the sectors. So I guess what this plan sort of does is it outlines how we see the economic strategy coming into being. And it's a mixture of what I call a top-down approach, but also a bottom-up approach. So looking at where does the community want us to be longer term from the big picture perspective, how do we adapt our economic development strategy to move towards that, but make sure it's representative of the industry sectors that we have. And in looking at those industry sectors, making sure that we look at the sectors from a somewhat global or national perspective, a bit of a snapshot, and then localising it to reflect what's happening in our community or in our city. Initially, we had the first meeting of the partners group. Things have been so busy in my diary. I think it was Wednesday last week. And represented there, I'm not going to run through all of them, but at this stage we had representatives from each of those organisations at the partners group. The preliminary role of the partners group at least is about doing these sorts of issues, establishing the timelines, making sure that it is practical and achievable, that we can try and work to those timelines, We want to make sure, and we'll keep coming back to this, that we've facilitated collaboration as much as possible, making sure that we've got engagement, and that will all lead to ownership and participation from the broader community, and that's really important. I guess the partners group we see as being made up to some extent of industry champions, so we want those industry champions to provide a role back to their sectors. They act as a communication conduit back to their sector, but also feeding information into the partners group and into the broader reference group, which I'll get to in a minute, in the development of the economic development strategy. The partners group needs to be able to support the author in the design of the strategy, and also we want them to assist with the establishment of the industry networks and making sure that we have relevant representation from the various sectors in the Coffs Harbour economy. Strategy author, assisting us is Dr. Grant Cancross from the Southern Cross University. Grant, can you just stand up? I'm sure you know him to most, if not all. Grant's at the back there. Grant will be coordinating or authoring the strategy. But I guess in many ways what we want to make sure that the strategy is doing is reflecting the feedback that we're getting from all of these various processes. But then it's about translating it into a strategy and action plans for actual delivery. And I think it's important to note that through that process, I think I can quite confidently say it's not going to be all council's role to deliver. There will be various stakeholders that will be identified that need to deliver to enable the economic strategy to come to fruition. In cases where council's not the direct deliverer, it may be that we have a facilitating or advocacy role to make sure that certain things happen. The industry networks that we've identified at this point in time that we think are important to make sure that we have covered are listed there on the screen before you. The first check, I guess, is to make sure that we've got everyone we should. If we have missed someone, we want to know about it early on in the process so that we can make sure that relevant industry sectors within the Coffs City and the Coffs economy are represented in the reference group and to some extent the partners group as well. But, you know, broadly, I guess the challenge here is about pulling together all of the various sectors that make up the Coffs economy and working out how we're going to develop strategies and actions that will enable the Coffs economy to move forward, recognising that through a process of prioritisation we might be focusing our efforts in some sectors more than others at certain points in time. And we need to make sure that it's clear why we're doing that. The role of the industry networks is to undertake an industry sector SWOT analysis, so we need to drill it down and make sure that we've identified what are the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats for each of the various sectors. There is a higher level SWOT analysis that we're going to start off this morning with Bernard, but you know, I guess we need to drill down and understand the sectors that are there and what makes them tick and what are the threats and opportunities that exist for those various sector groups. We need to work out how we're going to respond to that SWOT analysis, develop industry snapshots, as I mentioned earlier. Those industry snapshots will be reflective of what are some of the global and national impacts, but then making sure that it's localised as much as possible. From that, we need to prepare industry action plans. We're going to make sure that there's a nominated rep from the reference group that will cascade up into the partners group at the relevant time, if that hasn't already been done. We need to make sure that the various industry reps provide that input into the whole process, and that's so important. And once again, that word collaborate is there. Reference group, the membership of the reference group will be the initial partners group. Joe, just refresh me, there's about 12 people on the partners group now, thereabouts, yeah. Representing the organisations that I mentioned earlier. We want to make sure that added to that will be, if we haven't already got them, representatives nominated by the industry networks. And on occasion we may need to second relevant people with certain skill sets to make sure that we cover any gaps that are identified during the process. The role of the reference group is to work with the author to collate the strategy, which I mentioned earlier. Review feedback from the community, and I think that's really important. We need to make sure it's localised as much as possible and recognise that the broader community has a role in this as well. We want them to assist in the implementation of the strategy, so we need to make sure that they're there as part of the process for ongoing implementation, but importantly, monitoring. So once we adopt the strategy, both at the community and the council level, it's not just a matter of everyone going back to doing what they were doing prior. We want them to stay engaged and provide that feedback. How's it going? Are we delivering what we need to? Do we need to adjust the strategy? We want them to play a role in reporting to council based on their analysis of how the whole process has gone. That important communication channel, liaising with the government agencies where necessary. As I said, there are various other levels of government that have a role in this. We need to make sure that they're engaged as well. Liaising with the private sector and other investors where necessary. And I guess we want to make sure at the end of the day that we have a global reference group to provide feedback on the strategy. Really quickly, but on the process now, we're starting, I guess, with today. There's been a lot of work going into it thus far, but we want to launch the process and this initial SWOT here today. From there, we're working on identifying citywide projects, such as city planning and infrastructure. I know there's a report due to go to council next week on civic infrastructure needs, and it's all about planning for the future, so the economic development strategy meshes in with that as well. We need to establish an online communications platform, and basically that's to make sure it's easy for the various representatives that end up on the partners group and the reference group to actually engage with us on this. And we're using, Damon's I think going to give a presentation a little later about V-Teams and how it will work. We've already got the partners group pretty much signed up, and it's just a way that we can communicate directly with them and provide them with resources as needed. We need to establish industry networks, and we'll be doing that through August. Undertaking those industry networks' strengths, weaknesses, opportunity, threat processes, and developing the snapshots, and we're hoping to have that concluded by the end of September. Likewise, making sure that we have the industry network reps elected to the reference group by the end of September, and having the reference group well and truly established. In late September, we're planning on having Michael Schumann out here to conduct a workshop for council and the reference group, and having a luncheon for the business community. Jo can give you a bit more detail on Michael a little later, but he is seen as being somewhat of a guru on economic development worldwide. So having him come along and provide that focus as well should be a real advantage for us. By October, we want to make sure that we have the industry sectors involved in developing the action plans. Collating the information and preparation of the draft strategy during October, and that's where Grant's work will really kick in. Public exhibition of the draft strategy. We've held off. We were planning on doing it a little earlier, but to get through the inevitable Christmas, New Year, school holiday period, we've said let's hold off and do the broader community engagement in February. Review the strategy following that input during March, and ultimately with a view to having a report to council probably in April to have it adopted, and then there'll be ongoing implementation. And as I said, monitoring and reviewing the strategy regularly. But given that what we're looking at doing is having a broader strategy that's aligned with Coffs Harbour 2030, we want to drill down and say what's happening over the next 4 years. So aligning with the delivery program for the term of the next council, what are we going to deliver that will enable the achievement of the broader goals that are identified? So I see that in 2016, or 2015 or 16, there'll be a need to sit down and say, what are the next steps? How are we going to, what's going to be represented in our next delivery program for the next term of the council post 2016? And that's basically it. So with those thoughts in mind, that's sort of an overview of where we see the economic development strategy going. Is there any questions? Very quickly. As I said before, the devil's always going to be in the detail. We want to keep this at a pretty high level at the moment. So with that in mind, if there are no burning questions, I'm going to throw straight to Bernard Salt. I'm not going to read Bernard's bio or do any of that, because if you were here this morning, you had that. I'm not going to bore you with it again. But I think it is important to note that Bernard has come up here from Melbourne to present the ETC Business Leaders Breakfast. and it was a great opportunity to have him stay on and kick off or launch the economic development strategy for Coffs Harbour City. We really value having Bernard here. We think he'll add something to the commencement of this process that we want to make sure flows through into a very workable strategy for our community for the next 10, 20 years. So welcome to the stage once again, Bernard Salt. Thank you.